My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 72, I felt like the prop, the cautionary tale, the inconvenient truth hidden in plain sight. I was sitting at what I mentally dubbed the shadow table. The event was the annual Vance Family Legacy Gala, held this year at the opulent, historically preserved Stonebridge Manor in Greenwich, Connecticut. The air itself smelled of old money, freshly cut hydrangeas, and the distinct, subtle fear of being judged. My granddaughter, Charlotte, or Char, as she insisted everyone call her, was the mastermind behind this lavish affair. Char, a fiercely ambitious event planner in her late 20s, saw this gala less as a family reunion and more as a high-stakes networking opportunity, a meticulously curated production where every detail, including my placement, was calculated. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago embossed in gold, listing me as a guest of honor, which, in Char's lexicon, apparently meant seat her where she won't spoil the aesthetic. My assigned station was table 13. And no, that wasn't an ominous number assigned to a vibrant group of interesting people. It was exactly what it sounded like, the rejects. The table was tucked so far back into a velvet-draped alcove near the kitchen entrance that I could hear the rhythmic clatter of silverware being prepped for the next course, a symphony of banality underscoring the glamour surrounding me. The lighting here was softer, dimmer, almost an afterthought, deliberately ensuring that any photograph taken of the main dining room wouldn't accidentally include a 72-year-old woman sitting alone. I remember adjusting the simple, deep sapphire gown I'd splurged on. I wanted to feel elegant, not aged, but the environment was sucking the life right out of the silk. Every time a waiter rushed past with a tray of artisanal canapés, the drape of the alcove would flutter, a little theatrical reminder that I was close enough to the service area to be considered furniture, yet too far away from the buzz to be considered company. I wasn't completely alone, of course. There was a young intern from Char's planning company, texting furiously in the corner, and dear old Uncle Silas, 94, who was partially deaf and mostly asleep, gently resting his head on a porcelain saucer. But functionally, I was isolated. I had spent 40 years of my life as a high school history teacher, helping thousands of teenagers navigate complex narratives and build their futures. I had built a retirement fund that was steady, if not spectacular. I'd volunteered for decades. Yet here I was, Eleanor Vance, reduced to the quiet shame of table 13. Simply because I was a widow living independently and didn't fit the perfect family legacy image Char was broadcasting to her clients and prospective in-laws. The real insult began when the main dining room introduction started. Char, radiantly beautiful in an emerald gown, took the microphone. She introduced her parents, her brother the venture capitalist, her successful cousins, even the family's prize-winning show dog. Yes, really, all with dramatic flair. Then she paused. I could feel the attention shift, even from the corner. She cleared her throat and pointed vaguely towards my direction, though she studiously avoided looking at table 13. And, of course, her voice, amplified by the sound system, was suddenly dripping with practiced pity. We have my wonderful grandmother, Eleanor. She's still with us, bless her heart. She's enjoying a very quiet retirement up in Maine, focusing on, well, mostly her garden and her historical society projects. The way she said quiet made it sound like a life sentence, an intellectual quarantine. The bless her heart was the poison icing on the condescending cake. The room offered a smattering of polite, slightly confused applause, the kind you give to a minor inconvenience that quickly passes. It felt less like an acknowledgement of my life and more like an obituary read prematurely. The heat rushed to my face, not from anger yet, but from a profound, stinging humiliation. I gripped the wine glass so hard I feared the crystal might shatter. My daughter, Sarah, Char's mother, caught my eye from the glittering main table, the winner's circle. She offered a quick, forced, apologetic shrug, mouthing the words, "It's Char's show," before immediately turning back to an important-looking gentleman, effectively washing her hands of the moment. That shrug hurt more than Char's public slight. It confirmed that my own daughter valued social peace over my dignity. I watched the main festivities resume, the laughter louder, the conversation more vibrant, the flashing cameras focusing exclusively on the center of the room. I felt the familiar, heavy weight of invisibility settle over me. It's a weight known well by many seniors who find their worth diminished as their utility fades. I realized then that Char hadn't just placed me here to exclude me. She had placed me here to showcase me as the relic, the cautionary counterpoint to her own glossy, Instagram-perfect success. She was using my quiet, solitary existence to amplify her glittering, connected one. And as the evening wore on, I knew I couldn't endure another 3 hours of being the family's invisible footnote. I decided then and there that I would slip out. I would leave without saying goodbye, give them the silence they seemed to crave, and take my self-respect with me, even if it was battered and bruised. I reached down for my clutch, preparing my stealthy exit, determined to avoid giving Char the satisfaction of seeing me cry. But fate, as it often does, had a surprise waiting right behind my chair. My hand was hovering over the clasp of my satin clutch, ready for the great, ignominious escape, but the metallic clatter from the kitchen beyond the partition seemed to hold me in place. The humiliation wasn't just about tonight, of course. It was a culmination of the last decade, a slow, generational erosion of respect. To understand the sting of Char's casual cruelty, you needed to understand the foundation of sacrifice she was standing on. I leaned back in the uncomfortable banquet chair, letting the noise of the party wash over me, a dizzying blend of pop music, clinking glasses, and high-pitched, performative laughter. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back, past the polished marble and crystal chandeliers, to a modest split-level house in upstate New York. That was where the real legacy was built, not in this rented Connecticut ballroom. I was only 45 when my husband, James, passed suddenly from a heart attack. He left me with 2 teenagers, Sarah, Char's mother, and my son, Michael, and a mountain of unexpected medical debt. There was no life insurance payout, no huge trust fund, just a mortgage and a teaching salary. My dream had been to return to graduate school, to get my PhD in historical linguistics, a field I adored. But that dream was shelved immediately, carefully tucked away like a fragile piece of glass. Instead, I took on tutoring jobs, worked summers at the local library, and learned to stretch $1 until it screamed. The money I saved, the hours I poured in, weren't for myself. They were for them. I paid off Sarah's undergraduate tuition at NYU so she wouldn't start her career saddled with student loans. I financed Michael's tech boot camp, knowing he had a knack for coding that an expensive liberal arts degree wouldn't foster. I remember cutting up my old coats and sewing them into blankets because I couldn't justify turning up the thermostat, shivering through 3 upstate New York winters so the utility bills wouldn't strain the college savings. And Char, who now relegated me to the shadow table, was largely a beneficiary of that groundwork. Her mother, Sarah, had leveraged that debt-free start to climb the corporate ladder, which in turn funded Char's elite private schooling and her jumpstart into the high-end event planning world. They were standing on my shoulders. Yet today they treated me like the unstable ground they desperately needed to distance themselves from. It was Michael who kept me afloat emotionally, though his family was 3 states away in California. He was the only one who called every Sunday, who asked about my garden, who remembered the name of my favorite Greek philosopher. But even Michael had admitted the atmosphere tonight felt off. He couldn't make it due to a critical server launch, an absence Char had been quick to label as unsupportive when discussing the seating chart with her mother. I opened my eyes, looking at the vibrant, loud crowd. They weren't bad people, not entirely. They were just busy building their empires, busy chasing the next promotion, busy performing their perfect lives. And in that relentless pursuit, I had become an artifact they didn't know how to dust off or display properly. I was a past achievement, not a present commodity. The humiliation peaked when 2 of Char's bridesmaids, glistening young women with perfect smiles, strolled past the alcove, momentarily stopping to adjust a floral arrangement. They didn't see me, tucked behind the velvet drape, but I heard them. "Oh my God, did you see the grandmother?" "Table 13, one whispered, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. "I know. Char said she's super sweet, but totally broke. Like, just a retired teacher, you know? She had to liquidate some old bonds just to afford that dress, I heard." Awkward. I guess that's why Char gave her that back corner. You gotta manage the optics for the client photos, right? The sharp, brutal candor of their privileged ignorance hit me harder than any direct insult. Broke. Liquidation. Optics. They saw my dignity as a budget constraint, my life as a visual blight that needed managing. My bonds, my modest retirement nest egg, weren't just assets. They were the physical representation of those 3 frigid winters, the late-night tutoring, the deferred dreams. And now they were gossip fodder for a pair of 20-something social climbers. My jaw tightened. I wasn't just Eleanor Vance, the retired teacher. I was a woman who had navigated grief, sacrificed her intellectual aspirations, and built a legacy of resilience. The shame of being seen as pathetic was suddenly replaced by a slow, simmering, righteous anger. I shouldn't have to hide. I shouldn't have to slink away. But the loneliness felt absolute, a heavy shroud woven from 40 years of putting others first. I took a deep, shaky breath, fighting the urge to stand up and shout about every sacrifice I'd made. What was the point? They wouldn't understand. They were too busy living the results of those sacrifices to acknowledge the cost. I looked at Uncle Silas, still peacefully asleep, and felt a kinship with his quiet removal from the chaos. I thought about James, about the promise of a life we never got to have, and the overwhelming weight of carrying on alone. I finally reached for my clutch, ready to concede defeat and retreat into the dignified silence of my small apartment in Maine. The evening was over, but just as I started to push my chair back, a shadow fell over my table, and a deep, resonant voice, utterly unlike the rushed waiters or the giggling bridesmaids, cut through the noise, quiet as a conspiratorial whisper. "Ma'am, just for a moment, please act like you're with me." It was an order, not a question, and it stopped my heart mid-beat. The voice was a deep baritone, the kind that anchors a room without ever needing to shout. It was seasoned, cultured, and carried the weight of quiet authority. I slowly turned my head, my heart still racing from the sudden command, and met the gaze of a man who seemed entirely out of place near the kitchen entrance. He was tall, perfectly tailored in a charcoal suit that looked less store-bought and more custom-sculpted, with silver hair meticulously combed back and intelligent, startlingly blue eyes. He looked like the kind of man who should be sitting at the head of the main table, negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal, not hovering over the shadow table. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice thick with surprise and the residue of my recent humiliation. The man's expression was serious, his eyes sharp, fixed not on me, but on a specific group of people across the room. "I apologize for the abruptness, Mrs. Vance," he said, and the fact that he knew my name instantly raised my alarm bells. "But your granddaughter, Miss Charlotte, is currently briefing a group of my colleagues, some very influential contacts, I might add, on precisely why you are seated here. She's painting a rather unflattering picture of the burden of the elderly." My breath hitched. I tracked his gaze. Sure enough, across the vast room, Char was holding court near the grand fireplace. She was speaking animatedly to three sharp-looking individuals, two men in bespoke suits and one impeccably dressed woman, all clearly figures of considerable wealth and importance. As I watched, Char gestured subtly in our direction, a quick, dismissive flick of her wrist toward the back corner. "She's suggesting your quiet retirement is less a choice and more an inability to keep up with the demands of the modern world," the man continued, his voice low enough that even Uncle Silas, 3 feet away, couldn't hear. "She's using your situation to demonstrate her own professional competency, positioning herself as the savvy modern woman who doesn't let family obligations slow her down." A cold wave of shock, quickly followed by scalding rage, washed over me. This wasn't just passive neglect. It was calculated, strategic cruelty. She was monetizing my misery. The man smoothly pulled out the vacant chair beside me, the one intended for Uncle Silas's wife, who had passed away last year, and sat down with the relaxed grace of a predator settling in for a long, confident wait. He didn't fumble or hesitate. "I'm Arthur Sterling," he finally introduced himself, extending a warm, firm hand across the table. "And I happen to be Richard Sterling's older brother, not cousin. Char's prospective in-laws. I flew in from Silicon Valley this morning." Arthur Sterling. The name itself carried weight, resonating faintly with the financial gossip I occasionally overheard. He wasn't just a guest. He was the senior Sterling. This was a man Char should have been bowing and scraping to, yet here he was at the shadow table. "Eleanor Vance," I managed, shaking his hand. His touch was warm and reassuring. "Eleanor, they are looking." Specifically, the woman in the emerald cocktail dress. "She's a major angel investor Char is trying desperately to land. They believe I'm here talking business. We need to give them a distraction, a narrative that throws Char's perfect presentation into complete chaos. And I need a moment of peace away from the incessant networking." He leaned in, his blue eyes holding mine with an almost magnetic intensity. "Look at me, Eleanor. Smile like you know a secret only the two of us share. Let's make her question everything she thinks she knows about the Vance family structure." I hadn't smiled genuinely all night, but the sheer thrill of potential, unexpected revenge, or more accurately, redemption, ignited a spark I hadn't felt in years. I flashed a genuine, albeit slightly shaky, smile. "What exactly is the plan, Mr. Sterling?" I asked, leaning in, playing the part instantly. "Simple. I've known Richard's side of the family for 70 years. I know they value discretion, tradition, and intellectual depth, the things Char explicitly tried to eliminate from this corner. We're going to give them a story they'll actually want to talk about, a scandal of the quiet, sophisticated kind." Arthur picked up the lonely bottle of expensive Cabernet that Char hadn't even bothered to open for the reject table. "First, let's open this. A lady of your stature shouldn't have to drink tepid water while the rest of the room toasts their futures." He retrieved a corkscrew from the waiter's station with an effortless gesture that spoke of habitual command, pouring 2 generous glasses. As he did, he began talking, not just to me, but for the benefit of the 3 colleagues who were already beginning to glance in our direction. He spoke of historical architecture, comparing the Stonebridge Manor's Palladian windows to those of a property he owned in the Napa Valley, making it sound like a perfectly normal, high-level business conversation. The effect was instantaneous. The 3 people by the fireplace who had moments ago been nodding politely at Char suddenly shifted their attention. They didn't just look, they stared. Arthur Sterling was supposed to be the prized jewel of their networking efforts tonight, yet he was deeply, intimately engaged in conversation with the elderly woman banished to the back. The look of utter confusion on their faces was the first shot fired in my silent war for self-respect. Char's perfect narrative had just hit an invisible snag, and the evening, which had promised to be my most humiliating, was about to become the most electrifying. The subtle tension in the room, catalyzed by Arthur's unexpected presence at table 13, was palpable, but Char, ever the control enthusiast, was too practiced to let it derail her immediately. She swiftly concluded her pitch to the angel investors and, with a forced, dazzling smile, began to circulate, attempting to smooth over the social anomaly that was me and Arthur. Before she could reach us, however, the damage she had inflicted earlier began to backfire spectacularly. Now that the pathetic old woman was suddenly flanked by the powerful, enigmatic Arthur Sterling, Char's friends and Richard's wealthier relatives, who had previously offered only patronizing pity, were now compelled to approach, not out of kindness, but out of desperate social curiosity. They wanted to know how this retired teacher, this family burden, had somehow landed the most sought-after bachelor in the room. The parade began with Brenda, a relentlessly cheerful acquaintance of Char's mother, who had a reputation for offering advice on everything from tax law to optimal colon cleanses. Brenda approached our table, leaning in conspiratorially, her eyes flicking nervously between Arthur's impeccably tailored shoulder and my face. "Ellie, honey. Oh, I'm just so happy you're not alone tonight." Brenda gushed, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Before, when I saw you, I meant to stop by and tell you, about the Silver Tsunami dating app. It's for folks our age, no pressure, just companionship. I signed my Aunt Carol up. Honestly, you can't be picky forever, right? Time is a factor, Ellie. Time is running out." She delivered the line with the gravity of a doctor reading lab results. The implication was clear. I was running out of my chance to catch anyone, and my standards, if I still had any, were a luxury I could no longer afford. Arthur didn't react immediately. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, watching Brenda over the rim of the glass. The silence stretched, becoming an electric force. I felt the familiar heat of shame rising, but before I could mutter a defensive reply about my fulfilling life in Maine, Arthur set his glass down gently. "Brenda, is it?" Arthur's voice was polite, but his tone was like polished steel. "That's a remarkably prescriptive take on Mrs. Vance's love life. You seem quite concerned about her time factor." Brenda giggled nervously, sensing the shift in the air but misinterpreting it as playful banter. "Well, Mr. Sterling, you know how it is. We ladies just want everyone to find happiness before they end up in an assisted living facility, playing bingo alone." Arthur's smile vanished. "As a matter of fact, I don't know how it is. Eleanor, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the choices you make regarding companionship are driven by desire, not desperation, and certainly not by an arbitrary timeline set by societal pressure. Is that right?" I felt a surge of validation, a recognition of my autonomy that had been absent for months. That's exactly right, Arthur, I said, meeting his gaze. I have standards, and the ability to remain independent is a treasure, not a tragedy. Independent? Oh, but dear, that's where the trouble starts. A second offender, Richard's elderly cousin, Gerald, chimed in, oblivious to the frost forming around Arthur. Gerald was known for his insufferable, self-styled wisdom. My wife's sister, bless her soul, she waited too long. Suddenly, she's 65, realizing she needs someone for the paperwork, the yard work, the heavy lifting. You gotta have a partner, Eleanor. Not for the romance, but for the logistics. You're becoming a liability to your children, honestly. Better to find a sturdy widower now than be a burden later. The word liability struck me like a physical blow. This was the true undercurrent of Char's judgment. I was no longer a person. I was a logistics problem waiting to happen. My eyes began to sting. Arthur, however, didn't miss a beat. He turned to Gerald, his blue eyes suddenly glacial. Gerald, forgive me, but I find your assessment rather outdated. Eleanor is, by all accounts, far from a liability. In fact, her work in historical preservation and her deep knowledge of local municipal governance are assets that would make her an invaluable partner in any complex endeavor. To reduce her worth to yard work suggests a distinct lack of appreciation for intellectual currency, wouldn't you say? He paused, leaning closer to Gerald. Speaking of liability, how is that merger with Continental Holdings progressing, Gerald? I hear the legal team is looking for the smallest loophole to pull out. Perhaps you should focus on your own logistics. The shot was surgical and precise. Gerald, stunned that Arthur Sterling knew about his impending business disaster, paled and mumbled an excuse about needing to use the restroom, retreating immediately. The air crackled. The crowd, previously polite but indifferent, was now watching the shadow table with bated breath. Eleanor Vance, the pathetic retired teacher, was not just talking to Arthur Sterling. She was being fiercely, intelligently, and publicly defended by him against the very family members who had sought to minimize her. The script had officially been thrown out the window. Arthur didn't just save me from a moment of shame. He was systematically dismantling the narrative of my worthlessness, piece by piece, right in front of the people who had built it. I felt my posture straighten, my shoulders dropping the invisible weight they had carried all night. This was no longer just a ruse. It was a revelation. The air around table 13 felt less like an alcove and more like a fortress. Arthur's quiet, yet devastatingly effective, takedown of Gerald had done more than just save me from further unsolicited advice. It had established a perimeter of respect. The curiosity of the guests remained, but it was now laced with a healthy dose of fear. No one wanted to be the next target of Arthur Sterling's polite, razor-sharp wit. Char, however, had absorbed the shock and was quickly pivoting. She realized she couldn't control Arthur, but she could still control the environment and the symbolism. She saw an opportunity in the evening's final ceremonial event, the passing of the legacy, a new, highly stylized tradition she had invented for the gala. It was her version of the bouquet toss, tailored for the mature audience, but infinitely more cruel in its intent. The DJ's voice boomed over the speakers, shifting the mood from cocktail chatter to celebratory anticipation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for a brand new tradition, the passing of the legacy. We need all our esteemed guests who are ready to pass their wisdom and good fortune to the next generation to gather near the stage. This was Char's way of singling out the successful, the happily married, and the wealthy. The stage immediately filled with couples, business partners, and beaming parents. Then the DJ added the twist, clearly following Char's precise instructions. And now we ask all those who feel they have not yet completed their full legacy, those who are still searching for their final pieces of happiness or companionship, to join us and receive the wisdom of the elders. It was a brilliant, vicious trap. It divided the room into the givers and the takers, the successful and the failures. I tried to sink deeper into my chair. Arthur put his hand on my forearm, a silent anchor. Don't move, Eleanor. Don't give her the satisfaction. But Char's eyes, full of malicious anticipation, zeroed in on me. She knew I had to be the one to step forward to fulfill the humiliating role. She knew my quiet pride would make the choice unbearable. Grandma Eleanor, Char called out, her voice loud and falsely encouraging, we would love for you to receive the legacy. You've certainly earned the wisdom, haven't you? The spotlight, which had been perfectly centered on the stage, now swung slightly, throwing a harsh, inescapable beam directly onto table 13. The room went silent. All eyes were on me. The pressure was immense. If I didn't go, I was publicly rejecting Char's gesture and implicitly her vent. If I did go, I was submitting to the role of the pitiable senior who needed charity from her successful family. I looked at Arthur. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his jaw tight. He squeezed my arm once, gently, but the silent message was, do not yield. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. The room collectively gasped, expecting me to walk to the stage, expecting the submission. But I didn't walk towards the stage. I looked directly at Char, held her gaze for a long, defiant moment, and then I simply turned my back on the spotlight, took 2 steps toward the alcove, and addressed the waiter who was prepping a tray nearby. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady, even though my legs were shaking. "Could you please bring me a glass of sparkling water? And perhaps a piece of the chocolate torte? It looks divine." It was the most understated, yet revolutionary act of defiance I could have managed. I was choosing mundane comfort over public confrontation, trivializing her grand ceremony with a request for dessert. I refused to play her game. Char's smile completely dissolved. Her face, for a split second, flashed with raw, uncontrolled fury, a look that made her appear far more childish than any 72-year-old in the room. She was momentarily paralyzed by the unexpected rejection of her script. Seizing the moment, Arthur stood up, raising his glass, forcing the audience's attention back to the stage. "A brilliant ceremony, Charlotte. A true testament to your planning skills." "Bravo," he said, his voice loud, distracting the crowd. Char, however, was already recovering, her predatory instinct taking over. She turned the humiliation back on me. She lifted the framed photograph high, looked directly at the crowd, and said, her voice dripping with sorrow, "Well, it seems some legacies are simply too heavy to carry alone. We'll keep trying next year, Grandma. Maybe then you'll be ready to accept some help." Then, with a dramatic flourish, she tossed the frame, not toward the waiting crowd of takers, but directly into a cluster of young, successful couples, her friends. The frame was caught by a beaming 30-something lawyer, sealing my fate. I was officially designated as the old woman too proud, too stubborn, and too unfulfilled to even participate in the family's future success. I sank back into my chair, my heart hammering, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving behind a raw, stinging emptiness. I had won the battle of defiance, but lost the war of public perception. The tears I had fought off all night finally breached the dam, a single, hot track tracing a path through my carefully applied makeup. I quickly bowed my head, pretending to examine my clutch. I was done. I was leaving. I would call a cab and disappear into the Greenwich night. I didn't care what the optics were anymore. I just wanted the shame to end. Then a cool, gentle touch rested on the back of my hand, a subtle pressure that communicated both sympathy and steel. Arthur Sterling. He didn't try to console me with empty words. Instead, he simply leaned close, his voice a low, soothing vibration that was just for me. Not yet, Eleanor. Not until we've written the final scene. Your ride hasn't arrived. Arthur's hand on mine was a lifeline, a warm, steady presence cutting through the dizzying shame. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. His touch, though utterly unexpected and part of a strange charade, felt like the first genuine human connection I'd had all night. I fought to control my breathing, willing the tears to retreat. My ride is here, I finally managed, my voice a shaky whisper, still focused on my clutch. My Uber app says 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. You were a wonderful distraction. But I think I've reached my limit. Arthur didn't withdraw his hand. He maintained the pressure, just enough to keep me anchored. Eleanor, look at me. His voice was firm. I slowly raised my head, meeting his intense blue gaze. The Uber can wait. Let me explain what I see, and then you can decide if you still want to leave. He paused, letting the noise of the room fill the space, a deliberate tactic to ensure total focus on his words. I see a woman who stood up to a room full of people and a toxic family dynamic with nothing but a request for chocolate torte. That is bravery, not defeat. Char didn't win that exchange. She revealed the pettiness of her own soul. The entire room saw the difference between her performance and your authenticity. They saw a lonely old woman trying to save face. I countered bitterly. No, they saw me, Arthur Sterling, the man who detests shallow social games, choose to sit with you for nearly an hour. And now they're all whispering. They're no longer talking about Char's legacy. They're talking about us. He gave a small, knowing smile. And, Eleanor, I need to confess something. I didn't just sit here to save you. I sat here to save myself. He explained that he had flown in from San Francisco solely to make a brief appearance for his brother Richard and his new sister-in-law, a duty he fulfilled begrudgingly. Arthur was a genuine Silicon Valley titan, a retired tech founder who still held advisory positions on several major boards. His presence at any social event instantly turned it into a high-pressure sales pitch. Every single person at that winner's circle table is here for one thing: to pitch me, to network, to ask for money or advice or a seat on my board. It's exhausting, he admitted, rubbing his temple briefly. When I saw your table, tucked away, quiet, and I saw the sheer, undignified cruelty Char inflicted upon you, I saw an opportunity. An opportunity for a genuine conversation, far away from the transactional noise of the main room. And you used me as a shield, I observed, my voice leveling, the teacher-like clarity returning. Precisely. But the conversation we've had about historical architecture, about the economics of nonprofit funding, about the ridiculousness of dating apps for our generation, was far more engaging than any board meeting I've attended this year. I didn't expect that. I expected a distraction. I found an intellectual equal. His compliment was unexpected and profoundly satisfying. He saw my mind, not my age. So here is my proposition, Eleanor, he said, leaning in closer, his cologne subtle and expensive, cedar and spice. Your Uber is a minute away. Char is planning to corner me for a 10-minute private chat near the exit, where she will undoubtedly try to subtly discredit you to me. I need a graceful, unforgettable exit that makes it clear that my evening and my attention was entirely consumed by the most unexpected person in the room. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped silver box. It was the size of a jewelry case. My eyes widened in genuine alarm. "Arthur, I can't possibly accept a gift." "It's not a gift," he corrected, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "It's a prop. A spectacular, socially shocking prop. Char needs to see us do two things. One, leave together, and two, have me give you this in the most intimate, significant way possible. We are going to disrupt her perfect ending with a mystery that she can never solve." I hesitated. Leaving now meant quiet retreat. Staying meant stepping onto a stage I hadn't prepared for, engaging in a dangerous game with a man I barely knew, but whose presence had already restored my self-respect tenfold. What if she asks what's in the box? Then you smile mysteriously and tell her, "Some secrets are simply too precious to share, Charlotte. They belong only to the people who earn them." Now I need your answer, Eleanor. We have 30 seconds before my colleagues realize I've been gone for too long. I looked at the silver box, then at his determined, handsome face. He wasn't doing this for pity, he was doing it for the sport of it and for my dignity. The rage at Char, the frustration of the last 10 years, crystallized into a sudden, wild recklessness. "All right, Mr. Sterling," I whispered, leaning in and matching his conspiratorial tone. "Let's give them a final scene they can't edit out." With the precision of 2 seasoned actors, Arthur and I executed our final, choreographed sequence. We rose from the shadow table, no longer slinking away, but standing with a quiet, undeniable authority. Arthur gently placed his hand at the small of my back, a gesture of ownership and respect that was immediately visible across the ballroom. The first person to truly see us was not Char, but my daughter, Sarah, who was talking to the wealthy angel investor. Sarah's smile froze on her face. Her eyes, usually so quick to convey corporate confidence, were now wide with pure, unadulterated shock. The sight of Arthur Sterling, the most eligible and most powerful guest, escorting her mother, the family burden, from the back of the room, was an immediate, seismic contradiction to the narrative she and Char had spent months constructing. The moment Char saw us, she stopped talking mid-sentence. She was standing near the coat check, ready to intercept Arthur. Her face, usually a mask of professional poise, crumpled instantly into a mixture of disbelief and frantic calculation. Her meticulously organized evening was imploding. As we approached the grand, marble-clad exit, Arthur slowed our pace just enough to ensure maximum visibility. He didn't speak to me. He simply held my gaze, maintaining that deep, significant connection that suggested a profound, long-unseen romance rekindled. Char intercepted us, her smile strained so tightly it looked painful. "Arthur, Grandma, I didn't realize you two knew each other. Where you headed so early? We still have the after-party." "Charlotte," Arthur greeted her, his voice warm but utterly impenetrable. "A wonderful event, truly. But Eleanor and I have had a very long and quite fascinating evening." Char's eyes narrowed, flickering from Arthur's face to mine, searching for the crack in the facade. "Eleanor never mentioned you. I thought she was focused on her garden." The use of my first name was an attempt to assert familiarity and undermine my dignity, but I was ready. I smiled the secret smile we had rehearsed, a look of serene, unshakable confidence. "I try to keep my most precious friendships private, Charlotte," I said, my voice soft but clear, ensuring she knew this was a boundary she had crossed. You know how I am about work-life balance, and by extension, family-private life balance. The reference to work-life balance was a subtle, brilliant dig, throwing her own condescending words from the earlier part of the evening right back at her. Char flinched. She was losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. She turned her focus to Arthur, desperate for information. "So, how long have you two been reconnecting?" she pressed, forcing the word reconnecting to sound utterly improbable. Arthur, ever the perfect gentleman, simply gave a non-committal, devastatingly significant smile. "Long enough, Charlotte. Long enough." He then stopped, directly in the center of the foyer, where the light was brightest and the most prominent guests were gathering their coats. He looked at me, his blue eyes holding a genuine, deep warmth that transcended the ruse. He reached into his jacket pocket, retrieving the silver box. He took both my hands in his, covering them with his large, warm hands, and looked deeply into my eyes. The entire foyer fell silent. People stopped zipping their jackets and turned to watch. This was the moment of shock he had promised. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping just loud enough to carry across the marble floor, "I know this evening was not easy for you, but I hope you'll accept this small token of my profound admiration for your courage and intellect. Thank you for the most honest conversation I've had in years." He gently released my hands, opening the box. Inside, resting on a bed of midnight velvet, was not an engagement ring. That would have been too melodramatic, but a truly magnificent antique silver locket. It was large, beautifully filigreed, and looked like a priceless family heirloom. The collective gasp from the room was the soundtrack to Char's complete and utter collapse. She stood there, mouth slightly ajar, staring at the locket, at the intimacy of the gesture, at the immense social value of the man giving it, and at the woman receiving it, her pathetic grandmother. I took the locket with shaking hands. The silver felt cool and heavy. "It's exquisite, Arthur," I said, genuinely moved by the beauty of the piece, prop or not. Arthur leaned in, his lips brushing my ear, sending a dizzying electric current through me. "It belonged to my own grandmother," he whispered, a detail that was utterly shocking in its implication of personal significance. "Wear it with the dignity you have always carried." Then he straightened up, gave Char one final, polite, but withering look, and led me swiftly out the heavy oak doors, not giving her a single chance to speak or question. As the heavy door closed behind us, cutting off the noise of the astonished crowd, Char's face, the last thing I saw, was a terrifying, beautiful mask of barely controlled fury and total professional devastation. The revenge wasn't in the humiliation, but in the absolute, undeniable, public rewriting of my worth. We walked down the sweeping stone steps towards a sleek, black sedan waiting at the curb. The world felt suddenly silent, vast, and entirely new. The moment the door of the sleek black sedan closed, the carefully constructed facade began to crumble, but only slightly. The silence inside the car was profound, broken only by the quiet hum of the engine and the subtle scent of Arthur's expensive cologne. I was still clutching the antique silver locket, its weight a comforting anchor in my palm. "I think," Arthur said, the corner of his mouth turning up in a genuine, weary smile, "that was the most effective piece of social engineering I've participated in since the acquisition of my first tech company in '98. Congratulations, Eleanor. You were magnificent." I finally exhaled a long, shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the passing of the legacy. "And you, Arthur Sterling, are a menace. A wonderful, beautiful menace. Was the locket truly your grandmother's?" His smile softened. "It was My mother wore it until she passed. It's authentic, and it means exactly what I said it meant. Profound admiration. You can keep it. It's far more at home with you than it is sitting in a safe deposit box in San Francisco. I looked down at the exquisite filigree, the sheer generosity, the depth of the personal gesture hit me with surprising force. Arthur, I don't know what to say. That's too much. It's simply an acknowledgement of the price of admission to your true self. Eleanor, he replied, turning to face me fully. Now let's discard the act. We're in my car, not the foyer. I told the driver to take us nowhere in particular, just to drive until I say otherwise. I didn't want the risk of being overheard at my hotel. The car, I noticed, was traveling down the quiet, tree-lined back roads of Greenwich, heading away from the glow of the city lights. This was the moment I had dreaded and yearned for, the transition from performance to reality. "Tell me, Eleanor," Arthur began, his tone shifting from the assertive co-conspirator to the curious intellectual. "When you said you were working on historical preservation, what exactly does that entail? Is it the Victorian period, or something older?" I was taken aback by the genuine interest in his eyes. He didn't ask about my financial status or my loneliness. He asked about my passion. I found myself talking, truly talking, for the first time in months. I explained my work on preserving the local records of the early American Industrial Revolution in Maine, and the fight I was leading against a corporate developer who wanted to raise a historical mill site. Arthur listened, truly listened, nodding occasionally, interrupting only with highly informed questions about zoning laws and grassroots funding strategies. He didn't offer advice, he offered respect and engaged dialogue. "You see, Eleanor," he commented after I finished detailing the frustrating politics of the town council, "that's what Char, and frankly, most of that room, fails to grasp. They equate age with diminishing value. They see you as a retired teacher, a passive consumer of history. They don't see Eleanor Vance, the active preserver of history, the woman who can rally a community and fight City Hall. That takes courage, strategy, and a formidable intellect. Those qualities don't retire at 65. His validation felt like a healing balm on a wound I hadn't realized was still so raw. I remembered the bridesmaids whispering about my liquidation of bonds. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that tonight, Arthur," I admitted, looking out the window at the passing shadows. "It's difficult when your own family decides you're no longer relevant. They stop talking to you and start talking about you, as if you've become a museum exhibit of a past life." "I understand that perfectly," Arthur said, his voice dropping slightly. "In my world, after I sold my company, I became a commodity. Everyone wanted to know what I was going to do next, where I was investing. But no one wanted to talk about my late wife's poetry or my passion for obscure 19th century German philosophy. We seniors, we become defined by our utility or lack thereof. Tonight, you and I, we were utilities for each other, a shield for me, a defender for you. But this conversation right now is the real transaction." He turned back to me, his expression softening further. "I know our entire interaction has been built on a lie, a magnificent, hilarious lie, but that lie served a noble purpose. It protected your dignity. And in doing so, it revealed a woman who is vastly more interesting than anyone in that ballroom. I don't know where this conversation goes, Eleanor, but I know I don't want it to end tonight." He then reached into the console and pulled out a small, elegantly embossed business card. A personal card, clearly, with a private cell number and an email address ending in a simple, prestigious domain. "Take this. This is the truth behind the prop," he said, placing it carefully on the velvet case of the locket. If you want to talk about the mill site or 19th century philosophy, or perhaps just to continue the strategy planning for the next time Char throws a gala, you call me. No pressure, no expectations, just two adults free of the noise. I took the card. Arthur Sterling, retired tech entrepreneur, intellectual, and my unlikely champion. The driver pulled over to a quiet, unmarked stretch of road near the Connecticut Turnpike entrance. The driver will take you straight back to the city, or wherever you need to go, Arthur said, opening the door. Good night, Eleanor Vance. Thank you for the dignity you lent my evening. I watched him step out of the car. He didn't wait for my reply. He didn't linger. He simply stood on the curb, tall and solitary, until the driver pulled away, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the car, the heavy silver locket, and the exhilarating confusion of a night that had gone spectacularly, wonderfully wrong. The black sedan deposited me back at my small, rented apartment in downtown Stamford, Connecticut, where I was staying for the gala. I walked in, the silence of the space amplifying the chaos of the evening. The sight of my simple apartment, contrasted with the opulence of Stonebridge Manor, felt jarring. I immediately went to the bathroom, washed the makeup streaks from my cheeks, and stared at my reflection. I didn't see the humiliated old woman anymore. I saw a fighter wearing a borrowed symbol of respect. I spent the next morning waiting for the inevitable backlash. It came not from Arthur, but from Char. At precisely 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was Sarah, my daughter, her voice tight with panic. Mom, what in God's name happened last night? Char is having a meltdown. The angel investor, the one in the emerald dress, Mrs. Davies, canceled her follow-up meeting this morning, saying she prefers to work with people who display authentic family values, whatever that means. Char's reputation is on the line, Mom. I'm sorry to hear about Char's professional difficulties, Sarah, I replied calmly, running my fingers over the smooth surface of the locket, which I was wearing over my simple cashmere sweater. Don't be snide, Mom. Char said you deliberately flirted with Arthur Sterling, that you used him to sabotage her pitch. She said you accepted an expensive piece of jewelry from him in front of everyone, that it was all a performance. Sarah's voice rose hysterically. It was a performance, Sarah, but not mine, I stated. I was simply responding to the narrative your daughter created. She used my solitary life as a tool to boost her own career. Arthur, a man of genuine character, merely intervened to protect the dignity your family was so eager to trample. Dignity? Mom, Arthur Sterling is a billionaire. He doesn't talk to retired teachers unless they're pitching him a charity. You made a fool of yourself. You made us look like gold diggers trying to trap him. The accusation hit hard, forcing me to confront the ugly truth of their perception. Did you ever stop, Sarah, and ask yourself why a man of Arthur Sterling's stature would choose to spend his entire evening talking about history and philosophy with me, rather than chasing a transactional deal with Char and her colleagues? Did it ever occur to you that Char's relentless ambition and lack of basic human decency might be the liability, not my age? Sarah fell silent, the connection humming with her inner conflict. You know what, Mom? I don't have time for this. Char is on her way over to your place. She wants the locket back. She thinks it's evidence of coercion, and that she can use it to smooth things over with the Sterlings. You better give it to her. This is serious. And then Char arrived. She didn't knock. She barged in, her face pale, the remnants of yesterday's perfection replaced by raw, frantic aggression. "Grandma, where is it?" she demanded, looking around my modest living room with undisguised contempt. Good morning, Charlotte. Perhaps you should try a different approach, given your current professional predicament, I replied, standing my ground. Don't lecture me. You've ruined everything. Mrs. Davies is the lead investor for the Millbrook project, and now she thinks our family is trashy and manipulative. Give me the locket. Now, it's the only way to signal to Arthur that you weren't serious and that we aren't trying to exploit him. I took a deliberate step forward, the locket gleaming on my chest. Charlotte, this locket is a gift of admiration from one intellectual to another. It represents the respect I was denied by my own family, and I will not be returning it. I'll buy it from you, she hissed, pulling out her wallet. How much? 5,000. 10. Just give me the damn piece of jewelry. It's not for sale, Charlotte. The value is not monetary. You see, Char, you're always chasing the wrong kind of currency. You value optics. Arthur values authenticity. You value transaction. Arthur values connection. You value youth. Arthur values wisdom. Char, utterly defeated and furious, let out a noise of pure frustration. She realized she couldn't bully me or buy me off. You know what? Fine. Keep your trashy pawn shop trinket. But don't think for a minute this is over. I am going to call Arthur myself, and I'm going to tell him exactly what a miserable, lonely old woman you are, and that you're desperate for attention. She whirled around, intending to storm out. You do that, Charlotte, I said, my voice cutting through her rage, forcing her to stop at the door. But before you do, check your email. You might want to know who just donated a substantial six-figure sum to the Save the Mill Site historical fund I chair. Char looked at me, confused, then instinctively pulled out her phone. She scrolled, her eyes scanning the screen. Her face went slack with shock. The donor was listed, Arthur Sterling. The contribution was enormous. He didn't just defend me, Charlotte, I said, the victory sweet and deserved. He invested in my life. He proved that my legacy is real, and it is far more valuable than your gala. Now, please, get out of my apartment. Char staggered out, leaving the door ajar, the silence of the room returning. But this time it felt like peace. I walked over and gently closed the door. I was safe. I was respected. And my dignity, thanks to the quiet assistance of a very rich and very kind man, was finally restored. The stage was set not for retreat, but for a whole new act. The donation from Arthur Sterling was more than just money. It was a political statement, a declaration of alliance that completely shifted the power dynamic. 6 figures to the Save the Mill Site Fund, which had been languishing for years, was an undeniable endorsement of my work, my intelligence, and my standing. It was the public reversal I didn't know I needed, proving that Arthur valued my actual legacy over Char's staged one. 2 days later, the local Stamford newspaper ran a small but potent article. It mentioned the generous, anonymous donation to the historical fund, and then in a very noticeable footnote, it detailed how Arthur Sterling, described simply as a prominent tech philanthropist, had been seen leaving the Vance Gala with Eleanor Vance, the fund's chairwoman, the two locked in deep conversation. The implication was clear. Mrs. Vance wasn't just fundraising. She was moving in circles far more influential than the ones Char courted. The real shock came that evening when I finally found the courage to call Arthur. My finger hovered over his private number for nearly an hour, feeling the anxiety of moving from co-conspirator to potential friend. He answered on the first ring, his voice relaxed and genuinely pleased. Eleanor, I was wondering when you'd call. I take it Charlotte has had her little tantrum. She did, I confirmed. But Arthur, about the donation, that was extraordinary. You had no obligation. Why? Obligation has nothing to do with it. Your project is sound, your vision is compelling, and the developer Char is working for, a man named Henderson, happens to be a known corporate vulture. I enjoy disrupting those types of transactions. Consider it a strategic investment in a worthy cause and a silent message to Mr. Henderson that Eleanor Vance is no longer an easy target. The truth, however, ran deeper. Arthur confessed that he had seen the Mills site project mentioned in one of Char's pre-gala press kits, where she subtly belittled my involvement as a quaint hobby of a retired relative. When he saw Char use me as a social stepping stone, he knew exactly how to undermine her by validating the very thing she dismissed. You defended my worth in a way my family never could, I told him, the emotion thick in my throat. Thank you for seeing the value in what I do. I see the value in who you are, Eleanor, he corrected gently. I also saw your daughter, Sarah, this morning. She came to my hotel to apologize for Char's behavior and tried to distance herself from the whole affair. She also, rather clumsily, asked if I had any investment opportunities suitable for her. And what did you say? Arthur chuckled, a warm, resonant sound. I told her I only invest in assets that demonstrate integrity and a strong, proven track record of resilience. I suggested she start by investing in her own mother. That was the extent of our conversation. His directness was stunning. He was not just a supporter. He was an advocate, willing to use his considerable social capital to demand that my family acknowledge my value. The ultimate, shocking reversal, however, was saved for the following week. Char, desperate to recover the business relationship with Mrs. Davies, organized a last-minute damage control luncheon, inviting only the most critical attendees from the gala, including, surprisingly, me. Char had to invite me, realizing that my mysterious connection to Arthur was now an unavoidable factor. The luncheon was held at a prestigious, members-only club in downtown Boston. As I was escorted to the private dining room, I saw Char, pale and strained, trying her best to charm Mrs. Davies and a group of Richard's family members. Then Arthur Sterling walked in. He was not invited by Char. He was the host. He approached the table, nodding politely to everyone, and then stood beside the head chair, the seat Char had desperately wanted for Mrs. Davies. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice smooth and authoritative. I apologize for the confusion. This luncheon was organized to clarify a few things. First, the Stonebridge Gala. I was deeply disappointed to see how a respected pillar of the community, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, was treated. And second, on the matter of the Millbrook project, which Mrs. Vance chairs. I am not only a major donor, but I have also recently purchased the land Henderson was attempting to acquire. The mill site is now permanently protected. The room erupted in stunned silence. Char looked like she was about to faint. Henderson's deal, which would have made Char's firm millions, was dead. Arthur then looked directly at me, a soft, genuine smile replacing his business facade. "Eleanor, would you do me the honor of sitting here?" He pulled out the seat next to him, the co-host seat. I walked to the front of the table, past Char's frozen, defeated figure, and took the seat of honor. The tables had not just been turned, they had been completely disassembled and rebuilt with me at the center. I was no longer the pity case. I was the associate of Arthur Sterling, the gatekeeper of a protected legacy, and the indirect cause of Char's professional collapse. The ultimate revenge wasn't loud. It was quiet, intellectual, and devastatingly permanent. The luncheon was a triumph, not of ego, but of justice. Arthur spent the entire meal not gloating, but genuinely engaging me in a discussion about the future of the mill site. He used his influence and knowledge to effortlessly guide the conversation, establishing me as a respected figure worthy of investment and attention. Char, utterly defeated, sat in strained silence, watching her network crumble because of the integrity Arthur embodied. As the luncheon ended and the guests, now offering me genuine, rather than obligatory, respect, departed, Arthur and I lingered. Char approached us one last time, not with aggression, but with a defeated plea. "Arthur, please, can we talk? I need to understand why you did this. Why you destroyed my biggest deal for this." She gestured vaguely at me, the confusion still evident. Arthur looked at his watch, a heavy, solid timepiece. "Charlotte, I did it because your business model relies on dismissing the value of people who do not fit your immediate transactional needs. That includes your grandmother. That kind of short-sightedness, that lack of integrity, is a flaw I cannot invest in, professionally or personally. I hope you take this failure as a lesson in genuine human worth." He then dismissed her with a single, polite nod, the finality of the gesture absolute. We were alone. The waiter cleared the last of the china. I looked at Arthur, the silence between us now charged with something far deeper than shared conspiracy. "You know, Arthur," I said, fiddling with the locket, "I feel like I owe you everything. You saved my dignity, my historical site, and quite possibly my sanity. Thank you." Arthur reached across the table and placed his hand, warm and firm, over mine. "Eleanor, that's where you're wrong. You owe me nothing. In fact, I owe you." His blue eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, were soft now, vulnerable. "I told you our initial connection was a shield for me, and that the locket was a prop. But as I said in the car, somewhere between the shadow table and this luncheon, it stopped being an act. My heart, which I thought had long since retired from the business of fluttering, gave a sudden, hard knock against my ribs. My wife, Clara, passed away 5 years ago, Arthur confessed, his voice low and tinged with a deep, private sadness. She was a woman of immense intellectual curiosity and quiet dignity, much like you. After she was gone, I retreated into work, into the transactional world of tech because it was safe. It required no real emotional engagement. When I walked into that gala, I was the most powerful, yet the most profoundly empty man in the room. He paused, letting the truth settle. Then I saw you, cast aside, but refusing to break. And when you spoke, first with defiance and then with such sharp, genuine intelligence about your mill site, you woke something up in me that had been dormant for half a decade. You reminded me that real value isn't in a stock portfolio. It's in a conversation with someone who values history over hype and integrity over optics. He squeezed my hand. I didn't defend your dignity for Char's benefit or for my colleagues. I did it because I was deeply, genuinely outraged on your behalf. And I bought that land not just to spite Henderson, but because I wanted to be permanently connected to something you cared so deeply about. This isn't a transaction, Eleanor. This is a confession. He lifted my hand and gently kissed my knuckles. I know our journey started on a lie, but I am asking you now to step into the truth with me. I want to continue this conversation, not about history or business, but about us. I'm asking if you would consider a second act, not a fling, not a social arrangement, but a deep, committed companionship if you'll have me. The words were so direct, so earnest, that they brought a fresh wave of tears, but this time They were tears of overwhelming joy and relief. The man who had been the instrument of my public redemption was now offering me a private, profound grace. He saw my whole life, not just my age, and he found it worthy of love. "Arthur," I whispered, finding my voice again. "I am 72 years old. I have a historical mill site to save, and I have absolutely no idea what the protocol is for this kind of proposal." He smiled, a genuine, blindingly attractive smile that lit up his eyes. "The protocol, Eleanor, is simple. You call me. Not in 3 months. Not tomorrow. You call me tonight, and we'll figure out the rest over a very expensive dinner and a long conversation." I nodded, gripping the locket and the truth of his words. "I'll call you tonight, Arthur, but I need to warn you. I have very high standards." "I'm counting on it," he replied, and the confidence in his voice was the most seductive thing I had ever heard. The second act of Eleanor Vance's life had officially begun. I called Arthur Sterling that night, exactly as I had promised. The expensive dinner turned into a 4-hour conversation about everything from the challenges of modern educational systems to our mutual, slightly embarrassing love for classic Hollywood movies. There was no pretense, no rush, just the luxurious, deeply satisfying pleasure of two fully formed, intelligent people connecting on an unprecedented level. 3 months later, the companionship had blossomed into a discreet, profound, and steady relationship. Arthur divided his time between his commitments in San Francisco and his new investment in my life, namely the meticulous, respectful restoration of the Millbrook site in Maine, which now served as a legitimate historical trust headquarters. We spent weekends not in flashy resorts, but in quiet, academic pursuit, examining dusty archives or walking the rugged New England coast, talking about everything and nothing. The change in me was obvious, radiating from the inside out. My health was better, my posture was stronger, and my apartment was suddenly flooded with flowers and obscure historical texts. My neighbors, initially surprised by the sleek black car that often parked outside, soon grew accustomed to seeing a woman who moved with a newly discovered confidence. My family, however, remained in a state of suspended animation. Char's firm had taken a massive hit, and she was forced to work on smaller, less glamorous projects, a consequence she tried desperately to blame on me. Sarah, my daughter, maintained an awkward, careful distance, still unsure if I was a successful social climber or a ticking time bomb of embarrassment. They didn't understand that Arthur wasn't about status, he was about substance. The truth of our relationship was forced into the public 6 months after the gala. Arthur's company, Sterling Ventures, held an annual private charity event, a small, exclusive dinner for longtime partners and friends in Silicon Valley. Arthur insisted I be his official guest. "It's time, Eleanor," he told me gently. "You are my partner, in every sense of the word. Let's put the rumors to rest and put the truth on display." The announcement was subtle, but devastatingly effective. As we walked into the sleek, modern glass-walled event space overlooking the San Francisco Bay, Arthur simply introduced me, not as the charity chair or the recent acquaintance, but as Eleanor Vance, the woman who makes my life make sense. The reaction was immediate and profound. The tech world, which valued Arthur's judgment above all else, instantly validated my presence. The whispers weren't about my age or my past. They were about my perceived influence, my quiet power. The headlines the next day were not about Arthur's investments, but about his personal life. Tech titan Sterling finds love with an intellectual. The news traveled fast, hitting the Vance family group chat like an asteroid. Char, in her desperation, did exactly what I knew she would do. She tried to exploit the situation, but this time in reverse. She posted a rambling, overly enthusiastic tribute to me on her social media, calling me her inspiration and claiming she had always known Arthur was perfect for me. The revisionist history was breathtaking, but I didn't care. Her approval was entirely irrelevant. The real reconciliation came unexpectedly from Sarah. She called me the day after the San Francisco event, her voice no longer panicked or demanding, but genuinely reflective. "Mom, I saw the photos. You look happy, really happy. And Arthur, he looks at you like you hung the moon. I was wrong, Mom. We were all wrong. We let the noise of our own lives make us forget yours. We treated you like you had no future. I am so sorry." It was the apology I had waited 10 years for. It wasn't about Arthur's money. It was about my happiness. "Thank you, Sarah," I replied, the lump in my throat finally dissolving. "I accept your apology, but please understand this isn't about winning. It's about reminding you all that a life lived quietly is not a life lived poorly. My dignity was always there. Arthur just gave me the strength to demand that you see it." Our relationship with Sarah slowly began to mend, built on a new foundation of honest respect. The family started to acknowledge me not as the fragile elder, but as the partner of Arthur Sterling, the woman who had tamed the legendary tech recluse. But the true final act of our love story, the one that would prove that the best revenge is simply living well, was yet to come. Arthur had a surprise planned, a moment of profound commitment that would bring our unconventional journey to its beautiful, rightful climax. A year and a half after the humiliation of the shadow table, Arthur and I stood in the exact spot where we first met. The velvet-draped alcove near the kitchen of Stonebridge Manor, now completely renovated and serving as the manor's private library. Arthur had quietly purchased the manor several months earlier, intending to preserve its historical significance and to ensure the physical space of my past defeat became the stage for my ultimate triumph. Our commitment ceremony was small, intimate, and profoundly meaningful. There were only 30 guests, Michael and his family, Sarah and her husband, who looked genuinely humbled, a few of Arthur's closest non-transactional friends, and, of course, Uncle Silas, wide awake and lucid for once, beaming at me from a comfortable armchair. Char was not invited. I had sent her a polite, handwritten note wishing her success, but gently stating that the next chapter of my life required an absence of manufactured drama. I wore a simple, cream-colored silk suit, and the antique silver locket rested over my heart. Arthur looked magnificent in a dark blue suit, his eyes full of the steady, unwavering love that had transformed my world. The moment came when Arthur took my hands, gazing at me with that signature intensity. "Eleanor," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "you walked into my life when I was just surviving, pretending that my professional success was enough. You, a woman of history, taught me that the future is only worth building if you honor the past. You taught me that a life lived with quiet purpose is the most powerful legacy of all. I love your mind, I love your dignity, and I love the second chance you gave us both. I vow to be your companion, your defender, and your equal for every single day we are blessed to share." I couldn't hold back the tears this time, but they were the tears of absolute certainty. "Arthur, you saw me at my absolute lowest point, humiliated, defeated, and ready to walk away. Yet you didn't just save me. You saw the woman I was meant to be. You invested in my projects, in my intelligence, and most importantly, in my heart. I vow to bring you peace, joy, and the constant reminder that life's greatest value is always found in deep connection, not in shallow acquisition. We exchanged simple, matching platinum bands, symbols of our enduring, quiet commitment. The ceremony was filled with genuine warmth, laughter, and an overwhelming sense of authenticity. After the vows, during the reception held in the manor's sunlit conservatory, Sarah approached me. She didn't talk about Arthur's money or his status. She just held my hand. "Mom, I saw something in Char's old files about the gala. She had a note on your seating card. Table 13, the pity seat. Do not engage. She did that to you, deliberately. I didn't realize how cruel it was until I saw Arthur defend you. Thank you for showing me what true self-respect looks like." "It's okay, Sarah," I told her, truly meaning it. The cruelty was Char's failing, not mine, but it gave me the push I needed. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up creating the circumstances for our greatest happiness. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Arthur and I stood on the renovated balcony of the Stonebridge Manor, looking out at the vast, quiet lawn. "I often think about that night, Eleanor," Arthur murmured, putting his arm around me. "I think about the shadow table." "The shadow table is now the seat of honor, my dear," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. "My true legacy is not in the mill site or the bonds or even in my children. It's here, Arthur. It's in realizing that my worth doesn't diminish with my age, and that the greatest love story is the one you write after you've stopped waiting for permission." The final act of Eleanor Vance's life was not a lonely retirement. It was a silver-haired redemption, a profound partnership, and a testament to the fact that the most electrifying second chances often appear in the most unexpected places, even in the quietest, darkest corner of a wedding reception. And for this extraordinary pair, happily ever after was not an ending, but a new, beautiful beginning.